Welcome to Built to Go, a van life podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Wagg, coming to you from the College of Curiosity. This time it's episode 284, and we're going to talk about a recent trip I took to an island in the Mediterranean. Actually, two islands, and that would be the country of Malta. We're also going to take a deep dive into the news and all the changes that are going to happen in 2026, and very little good news there. And we're going to take a look at a place to visit that you've heard of, but probably haven't been unless you live in Europe. And we'll get to it all. It's going to be an unusual episode, but thank you for joining me once again, and thank you for giving me 2 weeks off. I had to take a week off in Malta because I was focusing on my trip to Malta, and then I took a week off for the Christmas holiday, which, even though I don't actually celebrate Christmas, it was still busy. But I'm here now. With you, just you and me. I have to confess to something here. You hear this? You can't hear it because the ice melted. Well, at one time there was ice in this glass. And now all that's left is a watery mixture of batra or bajtra. Honestly, I did not learn how to speak Maltese while I was there. It's not that easy of a language. It's a mixture of Italian and Arabic, and it has extra letters and stuff. But they make a liqueur there called Bajtra. It's B-A-J-T-R-A, which is the local word for prickly pear. And they make a liqueur out of prickly pear. It's actually quite nice. It's just a light, sweet drink that you can have with ice or mix into things. I think it's mostly for tourists. I mean, I'm looking at the bottle here that I dragged home, and the bottle is all in English with a little tiny bit of Maltese at the bottom, which is okay, because Malta has two official languages, one of which is English, because it used to be an English territory. But you find that when you go there, there's the culture of the place, the authenticity of the place tends towards the Maltese language. So the fact that most of this label's in English tells me that they're hoping that tourists will buy it, and well, heck, it worked, because here I am with a bottle. Anyway, I maybe have had a little bit too much of this to honestly do the podcast, but it's not going to stop me. Let's talk about Malta. The interesting thing about Malta is that almost everybody has heard of Malta. If you say Malta or Knights of Malta or Maltese or malted milkshake, which is a completely different thing, to get that out of the way, people have heard the term, but what is it? It's like vaguely European? Is it like a country in Europe, like maybe next to Poland? Or is it somewhere kind of in the Middle East, squeezed in near Syria? No, it is an island in the Mediterranean. So, if you're familiar with Italy, Italy is famously shaped like a boot, right? And then at the end of the boot, there is Sicily. That's sort of shaped like a football. You can imagine a boot kicking a football. Well, if that boot kicked the football and also kicked up a clod of grass, and it fell away, well, that would be Malta. That's not the nicest way to talk about an island, but it's a little tiny island south of Sicily, and it's about 58 miles from Tunisia. So Africa is actually parts of Africa are north of this island, yet none of its heritage relates to Africa. All of its focus is on Europe, which I found interesting, being that it was that close to Africa and all the rich cultures of Egypt and Libya and Tunisia and Morocco. Really, none of that had anything to do with Malta. Basically, their backs were turned on Africa and facing north and east towards Europe. But it's a fascinating place to visit. And I have been there twice now. This time I spent an entire week. The first time was just a cruise stop for a day, and I was enchanted both times. I love Malta, and I honestly went there with my wife in the thoughts of what would it be like to live here. We're getting older. I'm going to turn 60 this year. It's time to start thinking of retiring. And we thought, well, what if we retired outside of the United States? And Malta ranks highly for a number of reasons for expats, and we just thought we'd go check it out. Now, this isn't going to happen imminently, so we weren't doing any, visiting the home office to determine residency requirements or anything like that. We were just going to see, what it would be like. And the way we did that was we booked different places to stay during the week. Rather than stay at one place, we went all over. So when we landed at the airport, it was 9:30 at night. And I thought, well, we're going to be tired. It's a 7-hour time difference. We better just get to a hotel that first night. My thinking being we would want the front desk of the hotel's services to help us figure things out. Unfortunately, the place we booked, which was beautiful, by the way, it was called Deep Blue, and it's over by the Blue Lagoon. It was a boutique hotel. Beautiful room, wonderful restaurants there. I can highly recommend the hotel, but it doesn't have a front desk. It's just a little place. They only have 11 rooms, and this family runs it. And they don't have somebody at the front desk. I mean, you can call them anytime you want. More on the calling later. But it wasn't exactly what I had hoped. But it worked out just fine. We took a cab there, and we had everything we needed to get, situated in that time zone and understand things. And it was interesting being there because that is very much a tourist community. There's the Blue Lagoon, and this is a thing I learned about Malta, is that there's more than one of it. There's more than one Blue Grotto. There's more than one Blue Lagoon. There's a lot of cities that have the same names on different parts of the island or on other islands. So you have to be very specific. But this is the big Blue Lagoon that has the boat tours and everything. And that's where we were. And nobody lives there except for the people who kind of support the local businesses. So this would not be a typical place somebody would retire to. But it was fine. It worked out well. It gave us some experience of that part of the island. And one of the things we had heard about Malta is that it's kind of overcrowded. This is everyone's big complaint, is that in the last 10 years, a lot of people have moved there, and that this little tiny island is bursting at the seams. And, well, we just really didn't see that. We were on this big, wide open area, very Mediterranean, lots of rock walls and small trees, little olive trees here and there, and prickly pears everywhere. Note on the prickly pears, Columbus actually brought the prickly pears over to Europe. He, in his travels, found prickly pears, or we don't know that it was exactly Columbus, but it was during that exploratory period. Brought them over and planted them on some of these Mediterranean islands, and they thrived. And this island now is covered with prickly pears, and they're huge. You've probably seen prickly pear pads in the supermarket. If you don't live in Texas or somewhere where prickly pears are everywhere, you've probably seen them in the supermarket. And they're usually about the size of your hand. On Malta and the neighboring island of Gozo, which is part of the country, it's an archipelago, they're the size of tennis rackets. They're gigantic. It's a little bit like some sci-fi movie where you've been shrunk down or the animals have gotten really big. And this is not a form of island gigantism, which is a phenomenon. I think that this climate is just really perfect for these things, and they get a bit more water than they do in their natural environment in the desert southwest of the U.S. But that is speculation. Anyway, they're everywhere, and they're kind of pretty. And there's fortresses everywhere. I mean, it's a very, very old place. In Malta, anything that is from the 1600s and up is kind of modern. That's the modern period. But there are structures on these islands from 7,000, 8,000 years ago. And that's a little hard to wrap your brain around. So for tourist value, there's a ton of stuff to see, but we weren't going there to be tourists. We were going there to see what it was like to live there. So after a couple days in this tourist zone, we headed to Sliema, which is Sliema, and I'm still not pronouncing it correctly. And this is a famous expat community north of Valetta, which is the big city in Malta. And when I say big city, we're talking about a country with a population of about 450,000. The whole country is smaller than Chicago. Now, that sounds like, oh my God, well, there's 8 million people in Chicago or Chicagoland. So let's just say we did not feel crowded. Crowds were not the problem. There may be pressure on housing and things like that, but it was not like being in downtown Tokyo at rush hour. It was nothing like that. So Sliema is a community where the expats have built everything up, and a lot of the old stuff is being torn down, and there's a lot of high-rises going up with lots of condos, and the locals don't like this for a couple of reasons. One is that it's changing things. People don't like change. I get that. The other thing is that it's building this concrete wall between the ocean and the inland. So anyone in a 2-story house inland now has this concrete wall of condos in between them and the ocean. And that's kind of terrible. That's kind of how Florida is in many parts. And I can totally understand their frustration with that. Chicago, in its infinite wisdom, has a policy that you can't build tall buildings along the shore. We have this road called DuSable Lakeshore Drive, and on one side is the city, on the other side is the lake, and you cannot build on the lakeside, except for this one building that somehow made it. And that's great because that preserves the view for everyone. Malta didn't have that. So now you have all these massive buildings that are blocking everybody else in Sliema. Sliema was fine. We were able to walk to a grocery store, which was a Lidl, L-I-D-L. They've started to come to the U.S. Think of it as a fancy Aldi, sort of. It even looks like an Aldi, but it's a little bit fancier. And they had everything I think we would want. We had a list of products, like, do they have peanut butter? Do they have this? Do they have that? And basically, they had everything. They didn't have some fringy things like marshmallow fluff. I will have to bring that from the States should we decide that we move there. And they didn't have V8. V8, vegetable juice, that was a thing I never saw anywhere in Malta. So, okay, I can live without that. Prices were cheaper than the U.S., mostly. Some things were a little bit more. Eggs were higher, and eggs were on the shelf, not in the refrigerated section, because they don't wash the cuticle off the eggs there. But one really interesting thing was that in the U.S., when you go to the supermarket and you pick up a package, you can read the ingredients because they're all in English. In Canada, they're all in English and French because, well, those are the two languages of Canada. Malta's two languages are Maltese and English. However, Malta, being a little island, doesn't produce a whole lot of these groceries, and they're coming from overseas. And where they're coming from is basically Europe at large, and there's too many languages. So they just give up. They don't try to make the labels readable. So the labels will be printed in the country of origin, which means that you, the consumer, need to speak about 30 different languages if you want to read the ingredients. And we figured stuff out. They do have an allergen code that's universal, which is good, but I saw packages in Italian, German, Greek, Arabic, and there were a lot of these products I just didn't know what they were. And the other thing is, and this is something you'll hear a lot from people who have come to the U.S. from other countries, is they don't have anywhere near the selection. If you'd like peanut butter, they will have creamy and chunky, but they will have one brand of each. You're not going to have the Jif versus Skippy versus store brand versus Teddy, etc., etc., etc. They will have one brand of peanut butter in one size. You can get it, but you're not going to be able to get a whole lot of options. And that's how it is in most of the world. The U.S. is kind of crazy with the amount of choice we have in supermarkets. So that part worked well. That was fine. But we found that Sliema was nice. We had a really kind of a weird 2-story condo with massive windows overlooking the water. It was not the kind of place we would live in, but it made for a nice visit. But I don't think that's where we would ultimately stay. One really annoying thing about visiting Malta was we couldn't get our phones to work. We have AT&T, the expensive version, and we were paying the $12 a day or whatever it was to have our phones work there. But we couldn't make calls or receive calls. And we spent 90 minutes on tech support with them, and they said, turn off the auto roaming thing and then pick a network and see what works. And we got it to work, but it was weird. We had to use one network to make calls and another network to receive calls. It just didn't work. So it might be a good place, at least if you're on AT&T, to actually consider getting a SIM card, because every time we ordered groceries, which we did, they tried to call and they couldn't. And there was one time I was literally running around the street at 9 o'clock at night, chasing down everybody on a scooter to find out if they had my groceries. So that was a wrinkle, pretty minor thing, and not something that would affect you if you moved there. But if you're going to travel there, yeah, look into the phone situation, because AT&T is not on the ball with Maltese phone calls. For the next few days, we went to Gozo. Now, this is something that I don't think a lot of people understand. Malta is not just one island, it's a few islands. Most people live on Malta, but a lot of people, 35,000 or so, live on Gozo. This is an island to the north, and it is only a 20-minute ferry ride to get there. It's not a difficult place to get to. The ferry runs back and forth, back and forth. You don't need to get reservations or anything. You just walk up, pay, I think it was €3, and the ferry will take you over, and the ferry's perfectly comfortable, and there's a store on there, and honestly, by the time you're done buying stuff in the store, you're going to be on the other side. And then Gozo is much, much more rural. There is city there. They have all the support services. They even have a hospital. They have everything you could need, but it's much more rural and a much slower pace of life. I being from the northeast of the United States, I would compare it to going from Boston to maybe Keene, New Hampshire. It's like that. You have everything you need, but it's a little bit slower and a lot more green. There's a lot more green space. Now, when I say green space, one of the things I was concerned about with Malta is that there would be no nature at all, because these islands have been inhabited for thousands of years, and basically every square inch has been turned into terraced farmland or city. That's really all there is. But so much time has passed that a lot of these 1,000-year-old terraces are kind of wild. So it's not old-growth forest by any means. It's not forest by any means. Trees are a rarity, but it was greener than I thought, and there was plenty of nature to look at. So I was pleased by that. That was one of my big concerns, is not having any green space. And as far as blue space goes, it's everywhere. But it's interesting. All the housing is away from the oceans. It's all inland, because Gozo's history is that the Ottomans would come over and take away everybody who lived on the island and enslave them. So Gozo's history over the centuries has been to build fortresses, and the center of the island is called the Citadel. It's this massive fort with these huge walls in the capital of Victoria. Anyway, it's fascinating. I could go on and on about Malta, but you get the gist. This is kind of a really cool place to visit. It is unique. It will remind you of other places of Europe, but there is no place in Europe quite like this. And I recommend at some point in your life you go to visit. But if you're a hardcore van life person and you're determined to van life on this island, it is possible. Now, you're going to have to do more research than just listening to me yap about it, because I did not do van life there. In fact, we didn't even rent a car. More on that in a second. How you will do this is you will take your van to Sicily. You will get to Sicily via any of the number of ferries from Europe, go to Sicily, and then go to the complete southeastern corner of Sicily, and you will take the ferry from Sicily to Malta. There's a bunch of different ways to do this. It should be very comfortable and relatively affordable, and it only takes a couple hours. And then once on Malta with your van, you're going to find a place to park it and leave it there. Because driving in Malta is insane. I have been many, many places. I've seen many, many different styles of driving. I've been to Istanbul. I've been to Italy. I've been to Africa. I have seen lots of different ways of driving. The folks in Malta drive as though the brake pedal and the gas pedal are on or off, and that's it. There's no modulation whatsoever, and they're traveling as fast as they possibly can on these little narrow roads. And I am absolutely convinced that to get a driver's license in Malta, you sit down in front of an Xbox with Grand Theft Auto 5, and you have to evade the cops at 5 stars for 20 minutes. That is how you get a driver's license in Malta. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it's accurate. Holy cow. Now, I didn't drive there because, first off, I saw what was going on, and second, they're on the right side. They drive UK style. So for me, for the US, I would have to compensate for that, plus all the European signs, which I would learn fairly quickly. But these are the nicest people you're ever going to meet. They're just sweet and nice and helpful, and we didn't run into any grumpy people at all. But boy, when they're behind the wheel, it is Mortal Kombat on rubber. It is unbelievable. And I have never been a place where the driving was this aggressive and just breakneck. We got around on the island by using a service called Bolt, which is like Uber. It's a local version of Uber. Not even local. Bolt is international, but it's the predominant one there. And it was very, very inexpensive. So you do not need to have a car. You can travel your entire trip with just Bolt, and it'll be cheaper than renting a car. And that's what we did, and I can recommend that. Very short waits, but every single ride is like an e-ticket ride at Disney or Six Flags or someplace like that. It's always a roller coaster. Holy cow. So if you take your van there are very few legal camping places, but I highly recommend you do not drive your rig around. Leave it somewhere. It should be safe. Crime is very low there. And use Bolt or bicycles to get around. Seriously. Now, did I see campers there? Yes, I did. I saw a couple of Class Bs and one small Class C, but the streets there are 1,000 years old, so I highly recommend if you have a big rig, you don't bring it all, and if you have a small rig, you park it and let them do the driving because it's just crazy. That said, you will have an amazing, amazing time. There is a lot to see there. It's fairly affordable. For me, coming from the U.S., I hear Europeans complaining that it's kind of expensive, but for me, coming from the U.S., I found it very affordable, and I loved it. I think we could actually live there, but if we do move there, I will be giving up van life. I will not have a camper van on Malta or Gozo. It just doesn't seem practical. Maybe a Kangoo or a Berlingo or something like that, a little tiny van. Even an NV200 seems huge over there. But I might have a boat. I might do that wet van life that started all of this, and that could be interesting. Special thank you to Michael for buying me some gallons at buymeacoffee.com/built-to-go. That's 2 T's, not 3, not 1. Michael was kind enough to donate some gallons to the show so that we won't have any ads. And he follows in line of a long list of folks who have done the same, especially folks who do this every single month. So if you would like to help keep ads off the show and help support podcasting in general, please visit buymeacoffee.com/built-to-go and buy me a gallon of whatever you would like. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's a euphemism for just giving me cash. That's how it works. Do not feel pressured to do this. This is for folks who have a little bit of extra money and would like to pass it around. But we're all happy that there are no ads. So thank you, Michael, and thank you, everyone, for keeping ads off the show. Van life news. Okay, I will be completely honest with you. Every single time I turn on the news, it's just depressing, and I have to spend time undepressing myself so I can get stuff done. So this segment is not good news. It's only because there isn't any good news that I can find. I'll tell you what, if you have good van life news about anything at all, please send it to me. Please. I will consider every good news story as a gallon, to put it in the buy me a coffee thing. So anybody who brings me a news story, I will give them mental credit as though they have bought a gallon to support the show. And I will thank them because we need some more good news. That said, here is an extended news segment based on the news that is coming for 2026. And it's very U.S. focused, but not entirely. So there's one thing that here's kind of good news here. So it's not all bad news. But anyway, let's get this over with. First, the National Park Service in the United States will be changing their fee structures such that if you are not a U.S. resident, you will have to pay substantially more to visit a national park in the U.S. And I have a link here to an article from thetravel.com, and they have a chart. And the chart is that a U.S. resident will be paying between $15 and $35 to visit a national park, depending on size of your vehicle and what park it is, etc. There is no surcharge for you. And if you want an annual pass, it's $80. And that will get you into all parks in the country. Pretty good deal. However, should you wish to visit the U.S. and not be from the U.S., you will also pay that $15 to $35 entry fee. Plus, you will pay a surcharge of $100 just because you ain't from here. It's just a tax on people not from the U.S. So, if you happen to live in Germany and you are going to come to the U.S. and visit all the amazing national parks we have, you would need to add $100 on to each one of those, 64 parks now. Well, except that that's not true. You also can buy an annual pass. It's just $250 instead of $80. Now, in the grand scheme of things, if you are planning this major trip over to the U.S. to see national parks, these numbers are an annoyance because they're just a tiny part of your budget for that. But here's the kicker. If you are from the U.S., and you go to one of these parks and you don't have your passport with you or some other kind of ID, and I don't even know what they're going to accept right now, like a US ID or something, a real ID, I don't think a regular driver's license is going to do it. They're going to treat you like you're not from here. You've got to pay the international price, which is pretty amazing since it's your tax dollars that are paying for these national parks to be there in the first place. So, if you'd like to read that article, I have a link in the show notes. It was in thetravel.com, and the article is NPS new ID rule means Americans may pay international visitor fees up to $250 USD to visit national parks. Now, more serious topic. As you may have heard, Obamacare, also known as the Affordable Care Act, and yes, if you didn't know it, those are the same thing. If anyone's trying to tell you they're not, those are the people not to listen to. But yes, they're the same thing. And Congress has failed to renew the subsidies that help pay for those. This is all very complicated. The way this healthcare system works is that Obama created this thing, or championed it, the Affordable Care Act. It was originally written up by the Heritage Foundation of all people, the folks who gave us Project 2025. It was first put into place by Mitt Romney when he was governor of Massachusetts. And the idea is that the government will pay insurance companies to insure you. So the insurance companies still get their money, the government's paying for it, and you get health care at an affordable price. And one of the key things about this bill was that it would not take into consideration pre-existing conditions. So the insurance companies could not deny you because you had a pre-existing condition. That was huge. Okay, Trump tried to get rid of that law, etc. It failed. John McCain saved it. We know all that. Okay. But what's happening now is that there were government subsidies to help pay for it, because even with all this, it was still not inexpensive. It's about to get a lot more expensive, maybe 2 or 3 times as expensive. But it depends on what state you live in. So part of this was that your state could sign up to be on board with supporting this and help kick in some funds for it. So there were some states that were much, much better to live in and take advantage of the ACA, and some states that were much worse. Oddly, the number of people who took up the ACA was inversely proportional to that. It seemed like the states that didn't have full support for it had more people on it. And, well, Motley Fool, not a great source these days, unfortunately. I knew the guys who started it. They started on AOL when I worked there, and I'm kind of sad for what they've become. But that aside, they have a piece on what are the worst states to be on the ACA right now. And these are the states that are going to get hit hardest by these new rates. And I'm just going to read them off to you. You can read the article. It's linked in the show notes. And those states are Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, and Wyoming. Those states, if you are an official resident of those states and you're on the ACA, you are going to get hit the hardest. Your rates are going to go up the most. And I don't know what you do. I mean, are you going to move? Health insurance is such a crazy issue here. You know, the whole time I'm in Malta, I'm walking around realizing that nobody here has any stress about paying for medical bills or paying for college. None of them. And that everyone in the U.S. has both those things on their mind. Well, a lot of people have both those things on their mind. Anyway, rant over. Those states are the ones who are going to get hit the worst. So what do? There was a time, 25 years ago now, almost 27 years ago, where I was not gainfully employed because I didn't have to be, and I had young kids at home, and what that meant was we didn't have any insurance, health insurance, because that comes from your employer. And it was difficult to get, and what I did back then was I created an LLC that was mostly just paper, and joined a Chamber of Commerce, and I was able to get insurance through the Chamber of Commerce, which might be a strategy still. I don't know. You have to become part of some group that's going to offer you insurance, and, that's tricky. But one thing you could do is move. No, I mean, if you're doing full-time van life, moving is paperwork, really. Every state has different rules and laws, and different taxes, and figuring out which state to go to is quite difficult. It used to be simpler. It used to be pretty clear that South Dakota, Florida, and Texas were the best states. But now when you consider insurance, that whole calculus is changed. So I have a link in the show notes for USA News and World Report. They have a healthcare ranking. And part of their ranking is access. So while they're ranking quality and everything in their ranking, they also rank access, which is a hugely important thing. It doesn't matter how good it is. If you can't access it, it's no good. Number one state is Hawaii. Probably not the number one choice for most van lifers. Number two is Massachusetts. They have the number one healthcare access. So that's an option, except you're going to pay more taxes. Connecticut's 3, Rhode Island's 4, New Jersey's 5. It's interesting. The states with the higher tax burden are also the ones with the best options for health insurance. It makes you think that maybe there's a relationship between those two things. One state I would consider, if you're exploring this idea, is Delaware. Delaware is an outlier in taxes in many, many ways. You seem to get a lot of the advantages of a low tax state, of a high tax state, but they're actually a low tax state. And they're number 10th in access, but number 5 in quality, and number 26 in public health. So that's the part you'd have to navigate. Anyway, there's a link in the show notes. Good luck, folks. It's rough out there. Okay, a little bit of good news. Last week, I was at Costco. Yeah, I think it was the day before Christmas. This is not wise. Not wise. Christmas Eve at Costco is a uniquely American experience, but not necessarily a good one. Anyway, I'm in there trying to find a parking space. That's my big beef about Costco here in Chicago, is you can go there, but you can't find a parking space. And I noticed they have an EV charging lot now. So Costco's famous for having cheap gas. Right next to the cheap gas lot, there's an EV lot now that had 10 spaces. I thought, oh, okay, that's a good thing. But sitting in that lot was this big red van. Red. And so I pull in, and there's this guy in the front of the van, and he's like wiping the windows and cleaning up generally. And he sees me, see him, and he kind of, he looks at me seeing him, and he knows that, it's a camper van. It was a Brightdrop camper. I actually saw one in the wild, and he was charging up at Costco. And I thought, well, that's it, folks. All electric camping is here. All electric van life, I should say. There it is in the wilds. The first time I've seen it in the wild. I've heard about people doing it, in the little projects and stuff. But this was in the wild. This guy was in his van. I don't think he was camping in the Costco parking lot, but he was certainly charging there. And I thought, okay, that's it. It's interesting that it was red. I'm guessing he painted the entire van red. It was kind of a burgundy. And I got a crappy picture of it, but it wasn't worth showing anyone. However, how is this news? Well, it's news because Coachmen, major RV company in the U.S., I don't know that they have them for sale yet, but they have produced Brightdrop-based all-electric vans with air conditioning, heat, electric, cooking, electric, and bathroom, everything. I mean, it's a ready-to-go camper van. And it's called the Coachmen RVex. It's got about a 270-mile cruising range, and it's based on the Brightdrop 600. There's different models. Theirs is the 600. And they've solved a bunch of the problems that we talked about last week, or last time there was an episode. But not all of them. It was interesting. There were certain problems they couldn't solve. So what did they do with the back roll-up door? Well, they ended up just ripping it out completely. They took the back door out, and they put in their own custom. It's an interesting thing they did. It's a hatchback piece of glass on the top, and then a swing-away door on the bottom, almost like a Safari. If you remember the Chevy Safari's window structure, it's a bit like that. But it's huge. I can't imagine how much that piece of glass would cost if anything happened to it. And then there's a bug screen that comes down. So if you're camping, you can pop open that huge hatchback, and the bug screen will keep you protected from the skeeters and such. And that would be pretty awesome. They put in windows on the sides, up front, so behind the driver's compartment, which is entirely closed off with a sliding bulkhead, there's a lot of storage, big, huge bank of slide-out pantries and drawers, and a complete wet bath right there with a cassette toilet. and a gray tank underneath. So you had to empty the gray tank that was underneath, but the cassette toilet was, just a suitcase you carried out. And then there was a counter with a sink and a stove, and then 2 long couches behind that were vinyl, which honestly, they looked really retro. They looked like something you'd find in a 1970s van. But no full-time bed. The bed was these 2 couches that were like jackknife sofas that you had to fold flat. And it was almost like they had given up on design at that point. They just put in something that would fit. And I think, based on some commentary, they were having trouble with weight. They said there's only 500 pounds left over after the van's built, so the dry weight only gives you 500 pounds of wet stuff to add, That's not much. And I wonder why. Because, obviously, and I'm assuming it's because they installed a massive battery in there to power the air conditioner and stuff. It's 1,000 watts of solar on the roof. Anyway, it's an interesting project. And I've got 2 links for you on that. So one is from the Coachmen site, so you can go check that out. No, folks, there's no pricing. No. We're not going to have any pricing for something like this. And even better, there is a YouTube review by the YouTube channel Stranger Palooza. It's an hour-long video about this van where the guy who hosts that show borrowed the van for a night, and he goes over it in incredible detail. So if you are thinking about doing an all-electric van using an EV van, I highly recommend you watch this video because he goes over a lot of it. A couple of weird things, though. They couldn't add armrests to the driver's seat. They did replace the seats because the seats that come with Brightdrops are for delivery drivers. They're not very comfortable. But they couldn't put armrests on because they couldn't figure out how to have armrests not be in the way of the airbags. So the driver gets no armrests, which is tricky for long driving. And the passenger does have a much more comfortable seat, but they're about a foot lower than the driver, which is, I kind of see that as a feature. I don't know that the passenger needs to be sitting on the same level as the driver, and having them be lower means the driver can see over their heads. I don't know that that's a bad thing, but they commented on how odd it was. So anyway, check that out. That's the only bit of good news you're going to get from the news in this broadcast. Oh, while we're talking about bad news, here's another piece of bad news, I guess. Remember the ID Buzz, Volkswagen's new cute little camper van that was going to bring us back to the days of the sun bus? Yeah, they got rid of that. It's gone. In the U.S., for 2026, they've canceled it. There will be no 2026 ID Buzzes. And maybe they'll revisit it in the future, but no, that's gone. So $75,000, nobody was going to buy them anyway. That was in our community most likely, but that's gone. So goodbye. Okay, last bit of news, biggest bit of news. It's going to get really hard out there. There's an article. It's a YouTube video. I wish this was an article because it's so much data that it's the kind of thing that you really would want to go over. But it's not. It's a YouTube video, and it's from the YouTube channel Rollin' with RVer. A strange channel, but they go down 15 RV homeless laws that are coming in 2026, and many of these could affect us. It's an hour-long video. Watch it for yourselves. I have a link in the show notes. But here are some of the things that are coming, and a lot of them are in California. California is going to give it very hard. California has a rule that if an RV doesn't move for a certain period of time, they can just tow it without permission. But there was a limit. The RV had to be worth less than $500, which, that's pretty much just derelict vehicles. So that was the justification there. Hey, this thing's never going to drive again. Let's haul it away. And okay. Well, they just changed that limit to $4,000. And at that point, we're getting definitely into, say you've got a 2005 Dodge Caravan that you turned into a camper van and you've got 200,000 miles on it. Yeah, that's definitely getting into that 4,000 or less price limit. Basically, if they see that on the street, they can just tow it away. And that's the end of it. That's one thing that they mentioned. Another is a lot of towns are now having a 72-hour clock. Your vehicle can't be parked more than 72 hours. Now, I pay for a parking space in Chicago, but if I didn't, I would have to park on the street around the corner from my condo. And if I had the 72-hour clock, I would have to go out and make sure I move the van every 72 hours. And they've made it so it's not as simple as you just move it a little bit. It has to be parked, I think they said 1.5 miles away in order to have that clock reset. So Okay. A lot of places now have laws that it is illegal to sleep in your RV between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. That's right. So you might be able to park it on the street, but you can't sleep in it. The video mentions that police have been issued infrared cameras to see if anyone's sleeping in the van, and they've been trained on how to look for condensation and window covers and things like that. And there is a hefty multi-$100 fine for that. And that's in a few different places. You can find the details in the video. Other cities have taken a different tack where they're going to require you to have a permit to sleep in the city. So if you're doing some stealth van lifing and you're tired and you pull over and you want to sleep in this town, legally you're going to have to go to wherever you go for these things and get a permit to do that, which of course nobody's going to do, which means that the cops can then write you a hefty ticket. It's the same old story. It's not getting any better. Society hates van life and the concept of van life, and I think it's basically because they of xenophobia, the same old problem we've been fighting for millennia, and that we do not give them the money that they want us to give them. You know, if you stay in a hotel and you eat in restaurants, they've got all these special taxes that they take from you. But if you're cooking hot dogs in your van, well, they're not making that money from you. And oddly, I actually heard folks in Malta complain about that specifically. They only wanted good quality tourists, which to them were people who came and stayed in expensive hotels and ate in expensive restaurants. They actually referred to somebody going to the supermarket and buying some wine and cheese and watching the sunset as a bad tourist. So that's no dig against Malta. Like I said, everybody was super friendly. But that attitude does exist. And I think in the U.S. it's actually driving some of these laws. Anyway, let's move on. Tech Talk. What interesting thing about Malta, I had to employ my van life skills while we were staying in Gozo because the condo we were staying in, which was really interesting, it was this shotgun condo where basically there was a front room and then the kitchen was right behind it and then a bedroom right behind it and the bathroom right behind that. Very common design in Malta. Only has windows in the front, also very common. Most rooms don't have windows where you live in Malta. It's just the front room that does. And this room, this condo, well, it was getting a little cold. It was like 61. And I was like, okay, I'll turn up the heat a bit. And there was no heat. They don't have heat. Kind of like southern Florida, a lot of places don't have heat. A lot of Malta doesn't have heat because it just doesn't get that cold. And they just don't care. They put on a sweater. I was talking with some locals about this, and they said that, oh, yeah, we've got this nice heated blanket for the couch. That's all we do. But we weren't prepared for that. Now, there was heat in the bedroom, but not in the front room. So we're sitting there wanting to watch TV, which there wasn't one in the bedroom, and like, okay, how are we going to keep warm? And, well, I don't have my van with me. Not that I have a van anymore, but I don't have my rig with me. And, well, we have a stove, and the stove runs on propane. Weird thing, a lot of the places in Malta, the stoves ran on propane just like a van stove. In fact, the stove that was in this condo was the same one I installed in my ambulance. Exactly the same stove. And it had a pipe that went outside, and then on the porch there was just a propane can. It was interesting, but not a great source of heat. But I realized, and I know from doing this in van life, that there is a way to heat a rig, quote unquote, safely using a stove, and that is to boil water. Now, in your van, this creates a problem because boiling water creates vapor, and that's going to condense on your walls and stuff, and you don't want that. You get way too much moisture in your van. But in a condo, where you've got all that airspace, it's much less of a problem. So that's what I did. I took the biggest pots I could find, filled them with water, put them on the stove, and cranked them up and just boiled them. I watched them to be careful that they wouldn't boil over. There was plenty of air in there. I wasn't worried about building up gases or anything. And the humidity actually really made it a lot more comfortable. In fact, Jen said, wow, you did a good job of making this comfortable here. And I was like, that's them van life skills right there. And it is actually a reasonable way to get through a very cold winter night. And here's the thing, if you do this in your van, yes, you've got the water vapor problem, for sure. And if you're doing this in your van, you're going to need to have ventilation anyway, because you don't want to cook for that long of a period of time without ventilating somewhere. So you're going to have ventilation. That's going to help with the water vapor problem. But at the end of this, you're going to have a big pot of hot water. And so when you go to bed, you just turn the stove off, and that pot of hot water is going to release all that heat back into your van as the night goes. And if you're clever, you will very carefully use some of that hot water to fill bottles, or hot water bottles, Diet Coke bottles, whatever kind of bottles you have. Fill them up with the hot water and put them in bed with you. Make sure they're sealed tightly. And as I've said many, many times, water holds a lot of heat, and that can keep you warm for much of the night. And I think that's a great strategy for folks who don't have a heating solution in their van, but sometimes camp where they're a little bit uncomfortable in the van. This is a way to get through a particularly cold night. A diesel heater is much, much better. But if you don't have a diesel heater, this can work. And, well, it can even work in a condo on Gozo as well. Product review. I am not sure about this product, but I picked one up, and basically I'm just going to talk about it because it's so cheap at the moment. And that is an Echo Auto Plus. So Echo, Alexa, same thing. No, see, I said it, and now it's going to go off. Okay, you be quiet. I'm doing a podcast. So this is that Amazon Alexa thing that you love or hate, whatever. I kind of like it, and with the new Alexa Plus feature where it's a full-on AI chatbot now, I do find myself talking to the thing and usually berating it about its opinions on politics. But anyway, everyone has a hobby. And this device adds that to your car. The way it works is it's this little tiny box that you plug into a cigarette lighter. It comes with a cigarette lighter adapter. And then it hooks up to your phone via Bluetooth, and it uses the data from your phone. So if you have an unlimited data phone, you don't have to worry about it. It's just going to use that data, and it's not a big deal. And then it's just like having an Alexa in your car, and you can use it to play podcasts or music or answer questions. And now that it has the AI built into it, you can have it do all kinds of questions like, hey, I'm traveling down Route 1 in Saugus, Massachusetts. Can you tell me the history of this road and tell me what this orange dinosaur is and stuff like that? And it will be able to do it. And I think that is pretty cool. Now, I have one. I haven't installed it yet. I had the previous edition, and that worked fairly well, but it didn't have the new AI Alexa. Here's why I'm talking about this, though. It's only $15 right now. I don't know how long it's going to be at only $15. It's usually $60. I'm not sure it's worth $60, but I'm sure it's worth $15. In fact, it comes with a high power charging adapter that probably alone is worth $15. Now, you're going to have some cables to fight with. It does have this little box that's smaller than a pack of Trident gum that you're going to have to mount somewhere that has a microphone and some buttons on it. And it has another box that you can use so you can hook it up to your aux on your stereo instead of using Bluetooth if you want. I wouldn't do that, but you can. So there's some stuff to be fiddly with. But if you want to have Alexa in your car, it's only $15. I think it's worth taking a look at. And if you decide it's a bunch of crap, well, you still got a charger out of the deal. Anyway, Echo Auto. It's at Amazon, of course. I have a link in the show notes. I mean, it's $15. That's its biggest selling point. Tales from the road. So one of the things we did while we were on Gozo is, this was Jen's idea, and I thought it was a great idea. She went and found, where do the expats hang out? And expats on Gozo are mostly British, not entirely. But given that it was a British colony, and they speak English there, and they drive on the right, which is not a small thing, a lot of British folks moved there as an alternative to living in the UK. And they have their own communities, and it's not hard to find somebody from the UK there at all. There's a lot of them. There's far more people from the UK than from, say, the US or Canada or Germany even. And there's a British pub in Victoria on Gozo, right near the Citadel. And that's where a lot of them hang out. So we went in there about 5 o'clock at night one night, and there were a bunch of locals there, and we sat down in a corner and just kind of listened in, and it was exactly what you expected. These were all folks from the UK who were living in Gozo, talking about bureaucracy and politics, with things people talk about, a little bit of sports. There was one guy from Germany that, he's okay, we'll let him in, and it was kind of charming. But something odd happened at 6 o'clock. Everybody left except for the owners. And it was Friday night. And I was like, this is weird. Why are people leaving at 6 on a Friday night? And apparently, the way this pub was, it was so much for locals that people would stop in after work, grab a drink, and then go home. This was not a late night hangout kind of a place. And it also wasn't necessarily a tourist place. This was really for the locals. So it was exactly where we wanted to be. And by locals, I mean local expats. So after everybody left, the owner was there, and he started chatting with us. And he actually pulled up a chair and sat down at our table, and we had a great discussion about, what it meant to be an expat. We learned that the healthcare was excellent, better than the UK, he said. Even on Gozo, which was the smaller island, it was much easier to get healthcare. There weren't very long waits, and it was top-notch healthcare. I'm like, ooh, okay. I mean, we learned a lot. It was a very good conversation, but then I started asking questions, which it wasn't necessarily a mistake, but it got me in directions I wasn't intending to go. It turned out that he and his wife, who had also joined us, had moved there before Brexit. So for them, it was moving from one EU country to another EU country. It was fairly easy. Now that wouldn't be so easy. Now it would be going to a completely different country with completely different laws. They'd have to navigate just like we would should we decide to move there. But I asked, what if he thought about the UK? Would he ever go back? And then the conversation got interesting. He said, No, I wouldn't go back, not after what they've done to it. Who is they, and what have they done? Is he upset about Brexit, or is he concerned about something else? I mean, I don't actually know. I don't know what direction he's coming from here, so I don't want to annoy this guy. I don't want to get into a big political discussion, but I'm kind of like, what does that mean? And so I asked him, I was like, oh, that's interesting. I was just there. And, so what aspects didn't you like? And he said, well, let me put it this way. It's fine when people move to your country and they want to join your community and settle in. But when they want to change things, well, I have a problem with that. And I didn't address that. Because at the moment, I was keenly aware that I was on an island with its own culture and its own language, speaking English with a gentleman from the country that had basically owned this country for decades, and he was complaining about people coming and changing things in English, which was an official language of this country, simply because people had moved there and changed it. It was one of those moments. And, it was a little bit sad because it made me realize that doesn't matter where you go, xenophobia, which is the precursor to racism, is everywhere. It's everywhere, and it usually goes in one direction. And I wish there was a solution. I wish I knew what it was, but that's where we are right now, and I don't think there's enough time left in my life for me to see an end of this. So, while I might be able to leave the U.S., I will not necessarily be able to leave that aspect of things. But it was also kind of funny. A place to visit. Now, you think I'm going to say Malta or Gozo, or maybe a place in Malta or Gozo, but no, I feel like I've talked enough about that. No, I'm going to talk about someplace completely different, and that would be Poland. Let's talk about Poland. Why am I talking about Poland? Because on the way back from Malta to the States, we had a 22-hour layover in Warsaw. And I decided that we're going to explore Poland. No, what we did was we stayed at the hotel at the airport and then simply went into town to see one thing. And the one thing we decided to see was, it's called the castle. Now, the castle, the royal castle in Warsaw, is this massive complex and museum. And if you tour Europe, you're going to learn pretty quickly that the definition of castle is pretty loose. Like, what is a castle? It gets mixed in with palace and royal residence, and it doesn't really have a definition. So here, the royal castle is a royal residence. The royals did live there, but it's also the Parliament building where government takes place. This is a massive structure. And they've turned it into a museum, and it's a wonderful, wonderful tour. And if you're ever in Poland and in Warsaw, you should check this place out. It tells you a lot about the history of Warsaw, amazing architecture, great artwork. It's a really good tour. You're allowed to take pictures. They give you a little Android device with headphones that as you walk into a room, it tells you what's going on in there in any language you want. It was a great experience. Costs about $30, 25 euros, something like that. Well worth doing. And then just outside there is this classic European town with all these medieval buildings and highly decorated. And yeah, there's a bunch of touristy stuff there, but it's just really pretty and really old. If by old you mean not old at all, because if you remember the history of Warsaw, World War II was fairly dramatic there. And as you leave the royal castle, there's a short video displaying in the lobby that shows all the work they did to renovate it. Renovate is not the right word. The video shows nothing. Warsaw was leveled. That entire area of Warsaw had not a single building standing. Think Gaza. Like that. So everything that you have just seen, the beautiful medieval buildings downtown, the church, the castle with all its 100 rooms and mazes, it's all new. It took decades, but they rebuilt everything. And Germany even helped pay for it. And they didn't just throw it up and try to put something there. They didn't do what New York did after 9/11 and build a whole new building there. They rebuilt the castle as authentically as they possibly could, even sifting through the rubble and finding little pieces of things and incorporating them into the new structure. They did an excellent job. As you're going through, you'll see molding and things, and the audio guide will point out that you see where the molding isn't quite as bright. That's the original molding that we used to make a mold to make all the other molding, just as one example. I think it's an excellent testament to overcoming adversity and literally rebuilding from the ashes. Now, you could criticize this as Disney Europe, which is something, you hear. It's the tourist part of Europe. There's nothing authentic here. It's all been created just for the tourists. I don't see it that way. I think it has been created to show that Poland survived. The Third Reich is gone. All those people dropping all those bombs, gone. The USSR, which also played a role in this, gone. At least for now. They're trying to come back. They might. We'll see. They survived and they rebuilt what was there, such that if you saw this building in 1930 and then jumped forward 100 years, that same building is still there, even if it's all brand new. I found it moving. I liked it. And it's just an interesting place to visit anyway. Now, a couple things about Poland. English is not that common there. I mean, you won't have any trouble, but people who, there's a coat check there, which is mandatory. You can't carry around a coat or bags. The people there didn't speak English. Cab drivers didn't speak English. Little things like that. But in this day and age, that is such a minor inconvenience. Our biggest problem with Poland was at the airport. Definitely, if you were flying into that airport, the Chopin airport, make sure you plan extra time because they have a lot of passport checks and a lot of lines, and there's just some general confusion, and their boarding process is really chaotic. But you will get through it, and you will get on your plane, and you will get to go where you're going. So, Warsaw, really amazing history there, but specifically the Royal Castle is well worth a visit, in my opinion. Whew. Okay. Guess what? We're done. Thank you very much for listening to episode 284, and thank you for not yelling at me for taking 2 weeks off. I needed it. If you need to get a hold of me for any reason, I am jeff@builttogo.com, and music, as always, is by Simon Wegg. Until next time, remember the words of Todd Matthews. Time runs a tab you never signed for, then closes the bar and hands you the bill.